blinked. A second late. I've always been drawn to old places. There's a certain stillness to them, a quiet that new homes just can't replicate. So, when I found this apartment, it felt perfect. It was on the top floor of a building that had seen better days, with walls that held decades of faint whispers and settled dust. The rent was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but I didn't question it. I just wanted a space to myself, a place where the noise of the city would feel distant. The floors creaked with every step, a gentle groan that sounded like the house was sighing. It was a comforting sound, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in the vast, echoing space. The apartment was sparsely furnished. I brought only what I needed, wanting to keep the rooms open and uncluttered. My life was simple then. I worked from home, writing code in the soft glow of my laptop screen. Days would bleed into nights, marked only by the shifting light through the large, grimy windows. I enjoyed the solitude. It was a peaceful existence, predictable and calm. I would make my coffee in the morning, listen to the city wake up below, and then settle into my work. The evenings were even quieter, a time for reading, or just staring out at the darkening skyline, watching the endless stream of distant headlights. There was an odd feeling to the place, though. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on at first. It was more like a subtle pressure in the air, a sense of being watched that would prickle the back of my neck when I least expected it. I would dismiss it as my imagination. Old houses make strange noises, and my mind was probably just filling in the blanks. Sometimes, I'd hear a faint scratching from within the walls, or a sound like a single marble dropping on the floor above. Even though I was on the top floor, I told myself it was just the building settling, just the pipes contracting in the cold night air. This feeling was strongest in the hallway. It was a long, narrow corridor that connected my living space to the bedroom. A single weak bulb flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance just at the edge of my vision. Walking down that hallway felt like wading through deep water. The air grew thick and heavy, and the silence became more profound, more intentional. I started avoiding it after dark, preferring to take the long way around through the kitchen if I needed something from the bedroom. It was a small, irrational habit, but it brought me a sliver of comfort. Previous tenant had left a few things behind. A rickety chair, some old magazines, a large, ornate mirror. It was hung on the wall in that long, dark hallway. The frame was dark wood, carved with intricate patterns. Leaves. Vines that were now caked with years of dust. The glass itself was thick and slightly warped. Dark, cloudy spots blooming around the edges like old bruises. It was a beautiful, if somewhat unsettling, object. I thought about taking it down, but its weight and size made the task seem too daunting. So it stayed, a silent observer in the gloomiest part of my home. Every time I passed it, I couldn't help but glance at my reflection. It was a reflexive act, something I did without thinking. The distorted glass made my image look strange, slightly elongated and wavering, as if I were looking at myself through water. The dim, flickering light from the overhead bulb didn't help. It cast strange shadows across my face, making my eyes look like dark, hollow sockets. I'd see a flicker of movement behind me in the glass, but when I'd turn around, the hallway was always empty. The mirror seemed to hold on to the darkness, reflecting a deeper, more profound gloom than the hallway itself contained. I started noticing a small discomfort whenever I looked into it. It was a fleeting sensation, a momentary disconnect between me and the image staring back. I'd raise a hand to brush hair from my face, and for a split second it felt like the reflection took just a fraction of a moment longer to follow. It was barely perceptible, a trick of the dim light in my tired eyes. I'd blink, and the feeling would be gone. I told myself it was nothing. It was just the strange optics of the old, imperfect glass playing tricks on my perception. It was easier to believe that than to consider any other possibility. This feeling began to grow, like a splinter under the skin. The more I tried to ignore it, the more I found my eyes drawn to the mirror each time I passed. I started to hesitate before entering the hallway, bracing myself for that brief, jarring moment of disharmony. My quiet, peaceful apartment was beginning to feel less like a sanctuary. The silence was no longer comforting. It was heavy with anticipation. That old mirror with its dusty frame and cloudy glass was becoming the focal point of a subtle, creeping dread. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember the day because the garbage truck was making its usual racket down on the street below. The sound was a familiar anchor to reality. I was walking down the hallway on my way to the kitchen to make coffee. As I passed the mirror, I glanced at my reflection. I blinked. My reflection, however, did not. For a full, heart-stopping second, the person in the glass stared with wide, unblinking eyes. Then, a moment later, its eyelids closed and opened in a slow, deliberate motion. It was a perfect echo of my action, just late. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. The garbage truck faded into a distant hum. All I could hear was blood rushing in my ears. I stared at the mirror. The face was mine, but alien. My mouth was slightly agape. The face in the mirror mirrored the surprise, but like a performance. I stood locked in a silent standoff with myself. The air grew cold. The single bulb flickered, casting deeper shadows. Slowly, I forced myself to blink again. I watched my reflection so intently my eyes burned. I blinked. 1 second passed in deafening silence. Then the reflection blinked, delayed. The delay was undeniable. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my tired mind playing games. It was real. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Nausea washed over me. I wanted to run, get away from the mirror. But I was rooted, paralyzed by terror and a morbid curiosity. What was I seeing? Was I losing my mind? My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a neurological issue. A problem with my own perception. Perhaps a tumor present on part of my brain that processes vision. That seemed more plausible than the alternative. The alternative. The thing in the mirror was not me. That it was something else pretending to be me and getting clumsy. The thought sent ice through my veins. The reflection just stared back. A perfect delayed imitation of my growing fear. After the initial shock subsided, a strange sort of clinical detachment took over. The fear was still there, a low thrumming beneath the surface, but my mind needed answers. I had to be sure. I had to test it. I stood before the mirror, my feet planted firmly on the creaking floorboards of the hallway. I decided to start with something small, a simple movement. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I slowly tilted my head to the left. I watched my reflection, eyes fixated in the warped glass. For a beat, it remained perfectly still, its head upright. Then, with a smooth, fluid motion, It mimicked my action. The delay was there. Solid, measurable 1 second lag. My hands began to tremble, but I forced them to be still. I had to continue. I raised my right hand, palm facing the mirror, as if taking an oath. I held it there, steady, my gaze locked on the reflection. The figure in the mirror stood motionless for that same agonizing second. Its own hand remained by its side. Then, as if following a command it had only just received, its arm began to rise. It moved with the same speed, stopping in the exact same position as my own. It was a flawless copy, a perfect echo, but the space between the action and its reaction felt like a vast dark chasm. The sight made my stomach churn. I tried a more complex sequence. I tapped my chin. Once. Tapped my chin. Twice. Then I ran my hand through my hair. I watched, breathless. The reflection waited its turn. 1 second. Then its index finger rose and tapped its chin. Once. Then, twice. It followed by sweeping its own hand through its hair. The sequence was perfect. Every detail was replicated, every nuance of the movement was captured. But the delay, the constant, unwavering 1 second delay, turned the familiar gesture into something monstrous. It was like watching a recording of myself that was perpetually out of sync. The person in the mirror was a puppet, and I was pulling the strings, but the strings were a second too long. My final test was a smile. It was the hardest one to perform. My lips felt stiff and foreign, and the muscles in my cheeks refused to cooperate. I forced them, pulling the corners of my mouth into a tight, unnatural grin. I looked into the eyes of my reflection, which still wore my terrified expression. For 1 horrible second, my strained smile was met with a look of pure dread. Then, the reflection's face changed. Its lips slowly, unnervingly, curled upwards. It wasn't my smile. The shape was the same, but the feeling behind it was all wrong. My smile was born of fear and desperation. Its smile was cold. It was numbing. As my obsession grew, I started noticing smaller, more subtle differences. The 1 second delay was the most obvious anomaly, but it wasn't the only one. I began to watch my reflection with an almost microscopic focus, searching for any deviation, any mistake in its mimicry. It was during one of these intense staring sessions that I saw it. I leaned in close to the glass, studying my own eyes. I watched my pupils contract slightly as they adjusted to the dim light. I held my breath and stared at the reflection. 1 second later, its pupils also contracted, but they seemed to shrink just a fraction more, becoming tiny, sharp pinpricks in the dark irises. This discovery opened a floodgate of new, terrifying observations. I started noticing things that had no business being different. I would take a deep breath, watching my chest rise and fall. The reflection would follow suit, a second later. But sometimes, after its chest had settled, a faint new mist of breath would appear on the glass, a ghostly fog from an extra silent exhalation that wasn't mine. It was a small, fleeting detail, one I might have dismissed as a trick of the light if I weren't looking for it. But I was looking, and I saw it happen more than once. The thing in the glass was breathing on its own time. The shadows were another point of divergence. The dim, flickering bulb in the hallway cast long, dancing shadows behind me. In the mirror's world, those shadows were darker, deeper. They seemed to cling to the reflection, to have more substance. On several occasions, I saw a shadow behind my reflection linger for a moment, after my own shadow had already shifted with the flickering light. It was as if the darkness in that other world had a weight, and a will of its own, reluctant to let go of the figure it surrounded. The reflection was me, but it was being touched by a darkness I couldn't see in my own world. These subtle differences were far more disturbing than the delay itself. The lag was a consistent error, a flaw in the system. But these details, the pupils, the extra breath, the lingering shadows, felt like improvisations. They were signs of an independent existence. The entity in the mirror wasn't just a delayed echo. It was a separate being living in a slightly different reality, and it was beginning to diverge from the script. My reflection was becoming its own person, and I was forced to watch from a distance of 1 second as it slowly, subtly changed into something that was not me. I no longer try to fight it. My attempts at rebellion, shattering the glass covering the frame, only served to deepen the fissure between my world and its. The delay is a new rule of physics in this apartment, as fundamental and unchangeable as gravity. The 2-second gap has now become my reality. I have accepted it. I have resolved to live with it, or perhaps to live around it. My life is a slow, careful dance of action and echo. I move, and 2 seconds later, the universe follows. The apartment is quieter now. I have learned to move with a deliberate slowness, to make my footsteps so soft that their eventual echo is barely a whisper. I am a ghost in my own home, trying not to disturb the other ghost that follows me. I spend most of my days now just sitting in the hallway, on the floor, watching the mirror. The fear has been worn down by exhaustion and familiarity, leaving behind a kind of weary, hollow acceptance. I watch the entity that wears my face. It has become more its own person. The scar by its eye seems more prominent. The bruise on its jaw sometimes faintly reappears. I see it as a separate being now. A silent roommate trapped behind a pane of glass, living a life that is a distorted echo of my own. I wonder if it feels the same weary resignation. Or does it feel something else? Does it wait just as I do for what will happen when the delay changes again? Sometimes I wonder if the delay will shrink. Will it go from 2 seconds back to 1, and then to nothing? Will there be a moment of perfect, terrifying synchronization before one of us disappears? Or will it continue to grow? Will I one day perform an action and have to wait a minute, an hour, a day for the echo to arrive? Will I eventually be living so far in its future that my life is just a series of spoilers for its own? The question hangs in the thick, silent air between me and the glass. I have no answers, only the slow, steady ticking of the clock on the console table, a metronome counting out the growing distance between us. I look at my face in the glass. It looks tired, just like me. I take a slow, deep breath, feeling my chest expand. I watch it. 1 second passes. 2 seconds pass. Then, its chest rises in a perfect, silent imitation. I hold the breath, and I watch. And then, something different happens. Before my own delayed action is complete, the corners of the reflection's mouth begin to turn upwards. It is not copying me. I am not smiling. But it is. A slow, knowing, terrible smile spreads across its face, a full second before it even finishes echoing my breath. It blinked a second late, then it smiled a second early. The rules are changing again, and I am no longer sure who is the reflection and who is first.